Psychotherapy. Client-centered therapy is deceptively simple in statement but decidedly difficult in practice. Briefly, the client-centered approach holds that in order for vulnerable or anxious people to grow psychologically, they must come into contact with a therapist who is congruent and whom they perceive as providing an atmosphere of unconditional acceptance and accurate empathy. But therein lies the difficulty. The qualities of congruence, unconditional positive regard and empathic understanding are not easy for a counselor to attain. Like person-centered theory, the client-centered counseling approach can be stated in an if-then fashion. If the conditions of therapist congruence, unconditional positive regard and empathic listening are present in a client-counselor relationship, then the process of therapy will transpire. If the process of therapy takes place, then certain outcomes can be predicted. Roach-Ryan therapy, therefore, can be viewed in terms of conditions, process, and outcomes. Conditions. Rogers postulated that in order for therapeutic growth to take place, the following conditions are necessary and sufficient. First, an anxious or vulnerable client must come into contact with a congruent therapist who also possesses empathy and unconditional positive regard for that client. Next, the client must perceive these characteristics in the therapist. Finally, the contact between client and therapist must be of some duration. The significance of the Roach-Ryan hypothesis is revolutionary. With nearly any psychotherapy, the first and third conditions are present, that is, the client, or patient, is motivated by some sort of tension to seek help, and the relationship between the client and the therapist will last for some period of time. Client-centered therapy is unique in its insistence that the conditions of counselor congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathic listening are both necessary and sufficient. Even though all three conditions are necessary for psychological growth, Rogers believed that congruence is more basic than either unconditional positive regard or empathic listening. Congruence is a general quality possessed by the therapist, whereas the other two conditions are specific feelings or attitudes that the therapist has for an individual client. Counselor congruence. The first necessary and sufficient condition for therapeutic change is a congruent therapist. Congruence exists when a person's organismic experiences are matched by an awareness of them and by an ability and willingness to openly express these feelings. To be congruent means to be real or genuine, to be whole or integrated, to be what one truly is. Rogers spoke about congruence in these words: "In my relationships with persons I have found that it does not help, in the long run, to act as though I weave something that I am not. It does not help to act calm and pleasant when actually I am angry and critical. It does not help to act as though I were permissive when I am really feeling that I would like to set limits. It does not help to act as though I were acceptant of another person when underneath that exterior I feel rejection." A congruent counselor, then, is not simply a kind and friendly person but rather a complete human being with feelings of joy, anger, frustration, confusion, and so on. When these feelings are experienced, they are neither denied nor distorted but flow easily into awareness and are freely expressed. A congruent therapist, therefore, is not passive, not aloof, and definitely not non-directive. Congruent therapists are not static. Like most other people, they are constantly exposed to new organismic experiences, but unlike most people, they accept these experiences into awareness, which contributes to their psychological growth. They wear no mask, do not attempt to fake a pleasant facade, and avoid any pretense of friendliness and affection when these emotions are not truly felt. Also, they do not fake anger, toughness, or ignorance, nor do they cover up feelings of joy, elation, or happiness. In addition, they are able to match feelings with awareness and both with honest expression. Because congruence involves 1. Feelings, 2. Awareness, and 3. Expression, incongruence can arise from either of the 2 points dividing these 3 experiences. First, there can be a breakdown between feelings and awareness. A person may be feeling angry, and the anger may be obvious to others, but the angry person is unaware of the feeling. "I'm not angry. How dare you say I'm angry? The second source of incongruence is a discrepancy between awareness of an experience and the ability or willingness to express it to another. I know I'm feeling bored by what is being said, but I don't dare verbalize my disinterest because my client will think that I am not a good therapist. Rogers stated that therapists will be more effective if they communicate genuine feelings, even when those feelings are negative or threatening. Effective client-centered therapy requires a congruent counselor who to do otherwise would feels empathy and unconditional positive regard for the client. Be dishonest, and clients will detect, though not necessarily consciously, any significant indicators of incongruence. Although congruence is a necessary ingredient in successful therapy, Rogers did not believe that it is necessary for a therapist to be congruent in all relationships outside the therapeutic process. One can be less than perfect and yet become an effective psychotherapist. Also, a therapist need not be absolutely congruent in order to facilitate some growth within a client. As with unconditional positive regard and empathic listening, different degrees of congruence exist. The more the client perceives each of these qualities as characterizing the therapist, the more successful will be the therapeutic process. Unconditional positive regard. Positive regard is the need to be liked, prized, or accepted by another person. When this need exists without any conditions or qualifications, unconditional positive regard occurs. Therapists have unconditional positive regard when they are experiencing a warm, positive, and accepting attitude toward what is the client. The attitude is without possessiveness, without evaluations, and without reservations. A therapist with unconditional positive regard toward a client will show a non-possessive warmth and acceptance, not an effusive, effervescent persona. To have non-possessive warmth means to care about another without smothering or owning that person. It includes the attitude, because I care about you, I can permit you to be autonomous and independent of my evaluations and restrictions. You are a separate person with your own feelings and opinions regarding what is right or wrong. The fact that I care for you does not mean that I must guide you in making choices, but that I can allow you to be yourself and to decide what is best for you. This kind of permissive attitude earned for Rogers the undeserved reputation of being passive or non-directive in therapy, but a client-centered therapist must be actively involved in a relationship with the client. Unconditional positive regard means that therapists accept and prize their clients without any restrictions or reservations and without regard to the client's behavior. Although therapists may value some client behaviors more than others, their positive regard remains constant and unwavering. Unconditional positive regard also means that therapists do not evaluate clients, nor do they accept one action and reject another. External evaluation, whether positive or negative, leads to clients' defensiveness and prevents psychological growth. Although unconditional positive regard is a somewhat awkward term, all three words are important. Regard means that there is a close relationship and that the therapist sees the client as an important person. Positive indicates that the direction of the relationship is toward warm and caring feelings, and unconditional suggests that the positive regard is no longer dependent on specific client behaviors and does not have to be continually earned. Emphatic listening. The third necessary and sufficient condition of psychological growth is emphatic listening. Empathy exists when therapists accurately sense the feelings of their clients and are able to communicate these perceptions so that clients know that another person has entered their world of feelings without prejudice, projection, or evaluation. To Rogers, empathy means temporarily living in the other's life, moving about in it delicately without making judgments. Empathy does not involve interpreting clients' meanings or uncovering their unconscious feelings, procedures that would entail an external frame of reference and a threat to clients. In contrast, empathy suggests that a therapist sees things from the client's point of view and that the client feels safe and unthreatened. Client-centered therapists do not take empathy for granted, they check the accuracy of their sensings by trying them out on the client. You seem to be telling me that you feel a great deal of resentment toward your father. Valid empathic understanding is often followed by an exclamation from the client along these lines: "Yes, that's it exactly. I really do feel resentful." Empathic listening is a powerful tool, which along with genuineness and caring, facilitates personal growth within the client. What precisely is the role of empathy in psychological change? How does an empathic therapist help a client move toward wholeness and psychological health? Rogers's own words provide the best answer to these questions. When persons are perceptively understood, they find themselves coming in closer touch with a wider range of their experiencing. This gives them an expanded referent to which they can turn for guidance in understanding themselves and directing their behavior. If the empathy has been accurate and deep, they may also be able to unblock a flow of experiencing and permit it to run its uninhibited course. Empathy is effective because it enables clients to listen to themselves and in effect, become their own therapists. Empathy should not be confused with sympathy. The latter term suggests a feeling for a client, whereas empathy connotes a feeling with a client. Sympathy is never therapeutic, because it stems from external evaluation and usually leads to clients feeling sorry for themselves. Self-pity is a deleterious attitude that threatens a positive self-concept and creates disequilibrium within the self-structure. Also, empathy does not mean that a therapist has the same feelings as the client. A therapist does not feel anger, frustration, confusion, resentment, or sexual attraction at the same time a client experiences them. Rather, a therapist is experiencing the depth of the client's feeling while permitting the client to be a separate person. A therapist has an emotional as well as a cognitive reaction to a client's feelings, but the feelings belong to the client, not the therapist. A therapist does not take ownership of a client's experiences but is able to convey to the client an understanding of what it means to be the client at that particular moment. Process. If the conditions of therapist congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathy are present, then the process of therapeutic change will be set in motion. Although each person seeking psychotherapy is unique, Rogers believed that a certain lawfulness characterizes the process of therapy. Stages of therapeutic change. The process of constructive personality change can be placed on a continuum from most defensive to most integrated. Rogers arbitrarily divided this continuum into 7 stages. Stage I is characterized by an unwillingness to communicate anything about oneself. People at this stage ordinarily do not seek help, but if for some reason they come to therapy, they are extremely rigid and resistant to change. They do not recognize any problems and refuse to own any personal feelings or emotions. In stage 2, clients become slightly less rigid. They discuss external events and other people, but they still disown or fail to recognize their own feelings. However, they may talk about personal feelings as if such feelings were objective phenomena. As clients enter into stage 3, they more freely talk about self, although still as an object. I'm doing the best I can at work, but my boss still doesn't like me. Clients talk about feelings and emotions in the past or future tense and avoid present feelings. They refuse to accept their emotions, keep personal feelings at a distance from the here and now situation, only vaguely perceive that they can make personal choices, and deny individual responsibility for most of their decisions. Clients in stage 4 begin to talk of deep feelings but not ones presently felt. I was really burned up when my teacher accused me of cheating. When clients do express present feelings, they are usually surprised by this expression. They deny or distort experiences, although they may have some dim recognition that they are capable of feeling emotions in the present. They begin to question some values that have been introjected from others, and they start to see the incongruence between their perceived self and their organismic experience. They accept more freedom and responsibility than they did in stage 3 and begin to tentatively allow themselves to become involved in a relationship with the therapist. By the time clients reach stage 5, they have begun to undergo significant change and growth. They can express feelings in the present, although they have not yet accurately symbolized those feelings. They are beginning to rely on an internal locus of evaluation for their feelings and to make fresh and new discoveries about themselves. They also experience a greater differentiation of feelings and develop more appreciation for nuances among them. In addition, they begin to make their own decisions and to accept responsibility for their choices. People at stage 6 experience dramatic growth and an irreversible movement toward becoming fully functioning or self-actualizing. They freely allow into awareness those experiences that they had previously denied or distorted. They become more congruent and are able to match their present experiences with awareness and with open expression. They no longer evaluate their own behavior from an external viewpoint but rely on their organismic self as the criterion for evaluating experiences. They begin to develop unconditional self-regard, which means that they have a feeling of genuine caring and affection for the person they are becoming. An interesting concomitant to this stage is a physiological loosening. These people experience their whole organismic self, as their muscles relax, tears flow, circulation improves, and physical symptoms disappear. Persons of tomorrow are confident in themselves and comfortable with change in many ways. Stage 6 signals an end to therapy. Indeed, if therapy were to be terminated at this point, clients would still progress to the next level. Stage 7 can occur outside the therapeutic encounter, because growth at stage 6 seems to be irreversible. Clients who reach stage 7 become fully functioning persons of tomorrow, a concept more fully explained in the section titled The Person of Tomorrow. They are able to generalize their in-therapy experiences to their world beyond therapy. They possess the confidence to be themselves at all times, to own and to feel deeply the totality of their experiences, and to live those experiences in the present. Their organismic self, now unified with the self-concept, becomes the locus for evaluating their experiences. People at stage 7 receive pleasure in knowing that these evaluations are fluid and that change and growth will continue. In addition, they become congruent, possess unconditional positive self-regard, and are able to be loving and empathic toward others. Theoretical explanation for therapeutic change. What theoretical formulation can explain the dynamics of therapeutic change? Rogers's explanation follows this line of reasoning. When persons come to experience themselves as prized and unconditionally accepted, they realize, perhaps for the first time, that they are lovable. The example of the therapist enables them to prize and accept themselves, to have unconditional positive self-regard. As clients perceive that they are emphatically understood, they are freed to listen to themselves more accurately, to have empathy for their own feelings. As a consequence, when these persons come to prize themselves and to accurately understand themselves, their perceived self becomes more congruent with their organismic experiences. They now possess the same 3 therapeutic characteristics as any effective helper, and in effect, they become their own therapist. Outcomes. If the process of therapeutic change is set in motion, then certain observable outcomes can be expected. The most basic outcome of successful client-centered therapy is a congruent client who is less defensive and more open to experience. Each of the remaining outcomes is a logical extension of this basic one. As a result of being more congruent and less defensive, clients have a clearer picture of themselves and a more realistic view of the world. They are better able to assimilate experiences into the self on the symbolic level, they are more effective in solving problems, and they have a higher level of positive self-regard. Being realistic, they have a more accurate view of their potentials, which permits them to narrow the gap between self-ideal and real self. Typically, this gap is narrowed because both the ideal self and the true self show some movement. Because clients are more realistic, they lower their expectations of what they should be or would like to be, and because they have an increase in positive self-regard, they raise their view of what they really are. Because their ideal self and their real self are more congruent, clients experience less physiological and psychological tension, are less vulnerable to threat, and have less anxiety. They are less likely to look to others for direction and less likely to use others' opinions and values as the criteria for evaluating their own experiences. Instead, they become more self-directed and more likely to perceive that the locus of evaluation resides within themselves. They no longer feel compelled to please other people and to meet external expectations. They feel sufficiently safe to take ownership of an increasing number of their experiences and comfortable enough with themselves to lessen their need for denial and distortion. Their relationships with others are also changed. They become more accepting of others, make fewer demands, and simply allow others to be themselves. Because they have less need to distort reality, they have less desire to force others to meet their expectations. They are also perceived by others as being more mature, more likable, and more socialized. Their genuineness, positive self-regard and empathic understanding are extended beyond therapy, and they become better able to participate in other growth-facilitating relationships.